Hey guys, this is Pertinax, also known as Mike, and I just want to kind of share some of my experiences with you with pickup and kind of basically go through the basics and share with you guys. It's the first time I've ever done a video blog, so I'm just trying to throw something pretty basic together here. I think the most important thing is that you have to realize that what we're dealing with here is a technology. It's something that you can learn, but in order to learn it, it requires a lot of work on your part, a lot of change of the way you think about things, a lot of change in the way you see reality. And I think that that's the most difficult thing for most people to get a hold of. I've actually myself been pretty decent with women my entire life, but when I came across RSD and also mystery method way back in the day, I started to pick it up, and I thought it was really interesting because it gave you a really different view on the way that people work, the way that society works, the way that we perceive women as men. And I think that there are a lot of barriers there that are difficult to overcome. And I think that that's probably the most challenging aspect for most people, is reframing their consciousness around this idea that they can attain to good relationships with women and a good working relationship with women. I think that's the most important thing. So, I mean, typically, like, the way that we talk about this is, like, I mean, there are 4 basic stages, and like in RSD we talk about 4 basic stages in the whole process of pickup, which is pretty interesting. I mean, you can break it down. It's not really terribly different from the old mystery method days where there was these stages. And even when you're talking to anybody, there's stages of the interaction. There's hello, how are you? I'm fine. What's your name? Blah blah blah. You talk a bit. You talk some bullshit or whatever, and then goodbye. Blah blah blah. Even in just basic interactions when you're at work or with your friends or whatever. I mean, like, every human interaction has a basic structure, and interacting with a girl is really no different. It has a structure. So, I mean, it's not surprising that this structure basically exists. Now, the most difficult part, so the basic, I mean, as Julian says in his videos, there's basically 4 main steps to getting a good interaction with a woman, getting to the sex, if that's your goal, which I suppose maybe it is for most of you guys. Maybe you guys are looking for long-term relationships, but either way, these will be the 4 natural steps that you'll tend to go through. The first one is the open. So open, and then the hook, and then vibe, and then close, close. So those are the 4 basic steps of any interaction. And in the open, I think, is where most people have this difficulty, because there you are dealing with a lot of social anxiety, and a lot of that social anxiety is built into you from your experience growing up. How can you just go approach some strange girl and start talking to her and expect to have her on your arm in an hour? That seems impossible when you basically look at it from the sort of like mode of the basic frustrated male. They just they look at women as these unattainable creatures, but that's just not the case. I mean, like, women, of course, want love too. Women want men in their life too, and there's no reason why you can't be that man. So, I mean, I think the most important thing, and this is probably the most difficult thing, I think, to start, when you first start, is working yourself into a positive state. There's a lot of things you can do to do this. I mean, meditation is good, listening to uplifting music, just thinking about things which really inspire you. I mean, for me, like, my day job is, in science, so I think a lot about science and the beauty of nature. I think about inspiring places or inspiring events in my past, the past of my life and stuff like this. I mean, this is something that you can really do to, like, just inspire yourself. Get yourself inspired so that you can be inspiring to other people. If you're not inspired yourself, how can you expect to possibly be inspired to other people? I think that's one of the biggest things. You have to be inspired by yourself in order to be able to inspire other people. And this, I think, carries through the open. That's why it really doesn't matter what you do in the open so much, as long as you have that internal congruence within yourself. That's the most critical part. If you can get that internal congruence within yourself, the entire process is going to be much, much easier. I think the opening is really the easiest part. You just go up. I mean, you can even just say hi. I mean, that's kind of lame, I think. I mean, you can say whatever you want, but the vibe that you're communicating, the energy that you're putting out is much more important than what you say. So, I mean, you can say literally whatever. I mean, it doesn't have to be too crazy. I mean, even like, hi, my name is fine. But, I mean, other things could also be used too. I mean, there's a million different things you can say. Nice phone, that's a good one. Nice shoes, I like your shoes. Where'd you get your shoes? Oh, cool, whatever. And like, you can start this kind of flirty, basic social interaction. And that's really what the opening is about, is just like hammering through that process of getting yourself into the social interaction. Now, I think that one of the things that, I can't remember because I think it was also Julian says like, oh, it's like landing a plane. And it kind of is, because like, I mean, sometimes it can be pretty rocky, you know, because you are approaching, but you have to strike that balance. It doesn't really matter. So that's why it doesn't really matter what you say. The objective is to get into the basic conversation, get into the interaction, get yourself to the hook point, and then that's when the magic actually starts to happen. Because in the open, it doesn't really matter. I mean, this always says, but so many people have problems with the open. I think that's the most difficult part for most people, is when they start doing this, they start approaching women, the most difficult part is actually opening the girl. You know, you see her, and then you look at her, and you get all in your head, and you're like, oh my god, what if she doesn't like me? What if she doesn't like my hat? You know, what if she doesn't like my sweatshirt or whatever? You know, there's a million things that can go through your head, but really, she does not give a damn about your sweatshirt or your hat or whatever. She doesn't give a shit if you're bald or if you don't have whatever. I mean, she just doesn't care. You know, because she's going to see you as a person. She's going to relate to you as a person, as a man, you know, and until you present yourself to her as a real person, you know, it's like you walking down the street. You know, how often do you really care about like what other people are doing around you? I mean, you just look around and they're just doing whatever they're doing. So, I mean, I think it's really important to keep that in your mind. From her perspective, she does not really care that you're there until you open her. And then once you open her, which she cares about is the quality of the interaction with you. So that's, I think, the most difficult part. And it has to be natural. You know, a lot of times I think people will try to do this crazy stuff that they see people do in RSD, but like, it doesn't have to, you don't have to do that. You know, it can be anything. Like I said, whatever, help, hi, whatever, you know, there's a million things that you can possibly say. I mean, there's some interesting things. Like, I mean, another thing too is like, I mean, what we're trying to do here is not like, okay, we're trying to become better people, you know, like, so you can try crazy things. I've tried like a ton of crazy things in the past. I mean, like, one of the things that I thought was really funny is like, I did yoga at the club. Just like, I would sit down in the middle of the dance floor and I would do yoga right then and there. It was really, really interesting because it gave me a really interesting perspective on what was going on. What ended up happening was really kind of funny because like, all the girls in the club, like, they all came around me when I was just like doing this yoga, and they were dancing on me and kissing me and all this kind of just really positive feedback. I wasn't even doing anything, but there's this kind of this really strange thing that happens when you meditate is you become really present to the moment, you become really aware, and you really open yourself up to, you know, in this case, the universe at large, in this case, the club. You know, and that energy, just positive energy just radiates, and you can actually feel the energy of the club in that case. Like, you could feel the entire club was basically swirling around me at the exact center of the club, and I was the club at that point. It's really, really interesting how that worked, and I noticed that lots of people came to the dance floor, lots of people like, oh, what's going on, what's this crazy guy doing? It's like, you don't have to do this. I mean, like, in fact, probably don't do this if you're not comfortable with it, but like, for me, it was a really interesting experience because it actually gave me a sense of like, okay, wow, like, I mean, there's basically 7 girls dancing on me, and like, I'm just sitting in the middle of the floor basically doing nothing. So I mean, that kind of it's really interesting that kind of it changes your mindset, you know, and that's the thing I'm talking about, is changing your mindset towards women. You know, as soon as you change your mindset towards when you have these types of experiences, you know, it's going to be much, much easier. You know, of course, you can stop doing meditation and then, you know, of course, hang out with one of those girls that you really like and take her home. I mean, that's what happened to me, and that was really fun. We had a really great time together, and that was really cool. So, I mean, I think, like, once you have that open... Oh, yeah, I mean, the open... So, like, when you're opening, when you go up and you talk to someone, especially a girl, I mean, it really has to be a lot on you. You can't look for a lot of feedback yet. I mean, you just have to kind of plow through. You know, you just kind of calibrate to whatever happens. You know, calibrate after. Always after. Never calibrate before. Never try to like upregulate to the social situation. Always regulate to the social situation as it goes along. And this kind of comes along with being present. Because if you try to calibrate before, well, then you're thinking ahead to the future, right? But what you really want to do is you want to just always be in the present. So you have to calibrate to the present. So like that's why, I mean, 90% of that open is completely on you, and the only 10% is her. So like, yeah, like, oh, where are you from? Oh, cool. Like, you know, what is your name? You know, what do you do? Finding out just basic questions, you know, but the tone of voice is really important. You have to kind of break it in. You have to be direct, kind of. I don't like the word commanding, because it's not, you don't really want to be you don't want to command her, you know, not in the sense of like we typically think of the word commanding, but you want to be in control of that interaction. I think that's the most important thing. You know, another thing too is like, you know, when you open, you want to begin to open yourself to her presence. You want to basically feel her presence. You are talking to a girl now, so you have that feminine energy is being directed towards you. And then, so if you're not really well calibrated, you don't really understand feminine energy, it's going to feel really weird at first. But like once you start talking and you start getting into that interaction, you know, it'll become a lot more natural. And once you have a lot of practice and you've talked to a lot of women, you've experienced a lot of women, you have a lot of women in your life, you know, you actually begin to really enjoy her presence. It's not something that's freaked out. In fact, typically I feel like worse when there's not a girl there, and better when there's a girl there, even if it's just like a strange girl, you know, like I can talk to her. I feel much more comfortable with women, even than I do with men. I'd much rather be with a girl. So, I mean, there's a lot of different things that you can do, but I think with the open, the thing that you have to really remember is that you are the source and she is the sink. So the social energy is coming out of you and then it's being pulled into her. So there's this kind of cycle going on at the beginning. That's really, really important to keep in control. Another thing that happens, I think, too, in the open, sometimes you'll get this. I call it a frame war, and it's really easy. You want to establish your frame. You want to establish that you're in control. And like she may try to actually, because I mean women are really good at this, and a lot of times they have to do this in order to get through like all these douchebags coming up to them and saying like, okay, well, hi girl, how are you? Can I get your number? You look great today. But like, I mean, okay, come on. That doesn't work. So what girls have to do all the time is they basically have to put a very powerful frame reversal and just kind of demote that guy, get him out of the way so that she can go on with her day. You know, and she may try that on you, but you need to, at that point they call it demonstrating value. But yeah, I mean, you need to demonstrate control over the frame, control over yourself in that situation. So you have to be it's a very subtle thing. The frame war is basically, the frame war decides who's in control of the interaction, you know, whose frame is more present. So then when you finally get through all that, which typically only takes, I mean, can be like 5 seconds, you know, that can be the entire open, 5 seconds, then you're immediately onto hook, you know, but sometimes it can last, you know, 5 minutes at the most, where you're kind of going through this stupid frame battle and stuff like this, where you're trying to finally kind of get a little bit of control over the situation and assert your presence in that situation. Then as soon as you get to the hook, and the hook is I think the most subtle part, because this is actually where escalation really begins, and this sets the tone of the entirety of the rest of the interaction that you're going to have with that girl. You know, it's pretty easy, and if you have a clean open and you just kind of get through the sort of frame war, then you'll just naturally slide into the hook point. And there's basically, it's really important to remember there's 2 hook points. There's the social hook point, which will always comes before, and then there's the sexual hook point, which always comes after. Sometimes they can coincide, they can actually occur at the same time, and you'll just kind of blast through and you'll have that sexual hook point at the beginning. But oftentimes what will happen is like you'll get the social hook point, and the social hook point is that you are being accepted into her group. You know, you're okay to be in that social circle. You're not going to be kicked out of that social circle. You're in that case, like, you're safe. Like, nothing really fucked up's going to happen. You know, that's not really where you want to go. You don't. The social hook point is typically, like, if you stay there and you don't go past that, then that's what the friend zone actually is. So, like, when you get to that social hook point and you stop and you just continue on that social hook point, that is when you end up in the friend zone. And that's not where you want to be. But, yeah, then there's, of course, what do you do when you get to that social hook point is you just kind of keep pushing, you know. You want to keep that energy increasing, that energy of interaction, that subtlety of interaction. So you want to just kind of blast through the social hook point, get that social acceptance early in the interaction, and then once you get that once you get that early acceptance, then you can kind of just continue on and go right through this sort of sexual hook point. And I mean, a lot of this is with the eyes, you know, looking at her, escalating with your words, escalating the way you communicate with her, escalating the way you sub-communicate with her, pressure on, pressure off, pressure on, pressure off, you know, this kind of thing. This will get you into that sort of hook point, that sexual hook point, where she begins to actually emotionally invest in the interaction. You can really, really tell the difference between you when you hit the social hook point, because then the whole interaction is kind of aloof. Like, I mean, it's kind of going to be like, oh, well, she's going to be like, oh, well, kind of a little bit backed off, kind of chilled out girl, you know, talking or whatever. But like, when you hit that sexual hook point, everything changes and she suddenly gets like super invested in what you say. Like, you know, you might say like something like, I don't like your hairdo, and she'll be like, oh my god, like, you don't like my hairdo? Why? I just got it done today, or some crap like that, you know. And that will kind of be that's when you know, like, she's invested, you know, when that she's actually invested, she cares about what you think about her. That's the beginning of, that's the sexual hook point. As soon as you see that type of really strong emotional investment, that's what I would call like the sexual hook point. Now at this point, it's really, really critical that you back off. You know, you've passed all the tests, you know, and remember, you're only like 5-6 minutes into this interaction now. So like, you haven't been doing this that long. I would say 5-6 minutes max. You know, maybe it can be longer, but typically it's not that long. So there's basically, when you get to this point, you want to roll back, because in the beginning, at the beginning of the interaction, you know, it was 90% you and 10% her. But now you want to give her the chance to express herself. You know, you want to give her the chance to lean into you. And this is why, you know, pressure off, pressure on, pressure off is good. Push, you know, pull back, you know, push, pull back, you know, with the tone of your voice, with the things you're talking. The thing is, like, it doesn't really matter what you're talking about. I mean, it does matter to some extent. I mean, obviously you care about, like, okay, you want to figure out, you know, what kind of person she is, you know, what kinds of things does she like, what kind of music does she like. And then, I mean, this can also just happen, like, okay, well, what happens for me is, like, I find out, like, you know, once I get past, even if she's invested in me, like, she's gotten to that sexual hook point with me, she still has to hook me in order for the interaction to really continue in a sexual way. So I have to like her. That's really, really important. So if, like, you know, she really likes metal music, like, I'm not a huge fan of metal music, some of it's really good, you know, like, or she's really into like some stuff that I'm not into. She's really into television. I'm not really into television. So like, okay, that might not really work out. You know, I'll be much less inclined to continue that interaction. At that point, like, you have a choice to kind of terminate and try and find someone that you're more interested in, or you can just kind of continue and plow through if you like the girl. You know, but at this point, what you want to do is you want to back off. It's got to be 50-50 as soon as you have the hook. So basically you have this rapid increase, and then you kind of back off, and then it sort of levels out where you are kind of then playing with her, you know, enjoying her presence and filling on that feminine energy. And this is really, I think, what turns women on, is like when you get to that 50-50 and they can start to experience you as a person, once you start to demonstrate that you have control over yourself, the type of person you are, the types of things you're into, meditation, books, reading. I mean, these are the things that I like, you know, guitar, whatever things that you like to do. You know, you can start to kind of impress these types of things on her and communicate the type of person that you are, but you always have to be push-pull. You know, don't just slip back into idle social conversation, because you're not in this idle social conversation anymore. You're in a sexual type of conversation. and the nature of that sexual type of conversation is much, much different than like an ordinary social interaction. I think that that's really, really, really important to stress. So, I mean, again, I think like the source and sink should really drive the quality of the interaction, this idea of source and sink, you as a source. Because even after you pass the hook point, I still kind of conceive of it in my head. Maybe this is a little weird, but like, I conceive of it in my head as like, okay, I'm a source and she's a sink. I'm a positive pole, she's a negative pole. I'm white, she's black. Whatever, you know, so there's this polarity that's going on, and it's really important. Like, you know, that's the whole idea behind like masculine polarity versus feminine polarity. There's a very distinct kind of feminine archetype, and there's a very distinct kind of masculine archetype, and these are polarized. I mean, these types, these two archetypes are like against each other, and like, or they can work with each other, or they can work obviously against each other, depending on how, you know, everything aligns in the interaction. But this is the idea. It's like, so that's why I say like envision yourself as a source. And a lot of these ideas of like self-amusement and stuff like this, I think really come from this, because like what you're actually doing if you're like quote unquote self-amused is like you are the source of the energy that's driving that interaction, versus, you know, if you're the sink, then you're taking a more feminine role, and at that point you kind of, you know, devalue yourself because she's a woman. She's not looking for, you know, a female. Well, okay, maybe she is, but like she's generally not looking for a female partner. She's talking to you as, so because you're relating to her as a man to woman. So if all of a sudden you slip into behaving like a sink, you know, then you are taking the feminine role, and that's not what you want to be doing in this interaction. So I think that this is really important stuff, is like once you get to that sexual hook point, realizing that you're there, and then continuing then to relate to her as a man to a woman, you know, continuing to escalate physically, if that's like, you're doing that for you. Like, I mean, you're not escalating physically saying like, oh, well, you know, now I've reached the hook point and now I need to escalate physically to get to the next step, you know, so I can fuck this girl. It's not really like that. I mean, you're doing, because I mean, physicality is a way of expressing yourself. And I think that that's, I think, the most difficult thing. It's like when you're comfortable expressing yourself, you know, it becomes really natural to put your arm around a girl. It doesn't feel weird, you know, and if it doesn't feel weird for you, it probably doesn't feel weird for her. And this is the whole idea of state transference, is like whatever your state is going to be impressed upon her. So if you're comfortable, you know, putting your arm around her, if you feel completely comfortable doing that, you know, you're relating to her as a man to woman, it makes perfect sense to put your arm around the girl, because, you know, you like her, she likes you, you know. If you're comfortable in that interaction, then just go ahead and do it. You know, she will probably feel comfortable, most likely, you know, in that type of situation too, you know, and she'll kind of lean into you, and you'll start to really feel that bonding that really that's the magic. It's like when you start to really get that bond to happen, you know, between you as a man and her as a woman. I mean, I think that that's really the most magical moment, you know, when you start to really feel that unity of the masculine and feminine types of poles. So like as soon as you get kind of through this hook point, you know, as soon as you pass all of this and you kind of move on, you start to kind of feel this interaction happening, you know, the next thing that you want to do is the vibe stage. And at this stage, I think like what you're actually doing is this is what I think, I don't think of like, okay, vibing, like it's kind of a vague term, but like I like to think of it as like relationship building. This is when you actually build your relationship with the girl. This is where you actually figure out how you're going to relate to this girl, you know, as a man to a woman. You have to learn how to do that. And oftentimes this is when you will be hooked by her. And I think that that's the most important. You hook her first, and then she hooks you second. You get through the hook, and then you start to get interested in her through the interaction. You start to feel attracted to her in the interaction. Because it's one thing to kind of look at a girl and like lust at her from afar and say like, oh, well, she's hot. Well, sure. But it's another thing to actually feel attracted to her when you're in her presence, when she is kind of quote unquote your woman and you're her man sort of thing. You know, when you actually start to relate as boyfriend and a boyfriend to a girlfriend, or a girlfriend to a boyfriend, you actually kind of get this like character to the relationship. And I think that that's happening, you know, during this vibing phase. And like when you're doing this vibing, like basically like what you're doing is you're just existing with the girl, you know, you're existing with her, you keep doing all the other stuff that you did before, but you keep doing this stuff as you normally would. You know, you experience the woman, she experiences you. You continue on the play of that interaction, and you get to know her. I think that that's really, really important, because like, I don't know about everyone else out there, but like for me, like if I'm gonna have sex with a girl, I want to make sure that I actually really like this girl. That's really important for me. You know, that it's like otherwise it's just going to be bad. You know, and it is just bad if you don't really feel comfortable with her, but she's still like really, really in love with you, and she hasn't really hooked you. You're not really going to have like the depth, the quality of relationship with that girl. And like, you can start to tell, like once you get about, like, I mean, because this vibing phase typically lasts, I would say, before you really get into the sort of end of the interaction. You know, and when you're doing this vibing phase, it's typically about 30, maybe 45, maybe an hour. Between, I would say roughly an hour is normal. And this is where you're just kind of enjoying each other. You're, you know, flirting with each other. If it's really physical, you know, maybe like some kissing, hugging, you know, pulling her around the club a bit, you know, going to the bar, grabbing some water, stepping outside, moving around, getting into some different situations, stuff like this. And like at this point, you've isolated with her, and like you've really formed this kind of, I mean, bubble. I mean, it feels like a bubble. It feels like it's you and her, and then the world at large. And this is kind of a really interesting thing, because it's like, it's no longer just a you and just a her. It's like this, it's a unit. You've actually formed like a unit together. And like when you go through the vibing phase, after you pass this like hook point, you go into this vibing phase, it's you and her together. You're working as a team. You're a single unit. And I think that that's really the most, and like, you know, when you're with your girlfriend or something like this, like you actually feel like this sort of push and pull, like all the time. Like even if you just watch, you know, couples around, like, I mean, well, I don't know, couples that actually have a chance of like being satisfied with one another, you see them like they're playing with each other, pushing and pulling and pushing and pulling. And to me, you know, that sort of pushing and pulling psychologically that occurs it's a lot like sex. It's a lot like the same type of thing that you get when you have like really good sex with a girl. It's this pushing and pulling, this kind of knot of energy, of masculinity and femininity coming together to form a single unit. And what you're doing in the vibing phase is actually leading up to sex, because that same sort of pushing and pulling that you feel during the vibing phase is just amplified in sex. You know, it's a physical expression of what was already done psychologically earlier. So you can see that there's a red thread which is actually running through the entire interaction, like the entire like quote unquote pickup. And I mean, to me, this is the most beautiful part of the interaction, because then you're just with the girl. You know, you're with her. There's something really magical about that. You know, experiencing her presence as not a stranger anymore. So this is part 2 of the Pertinax summary of pickup, and in this section we're kind of going to be going over the end of the vibing phase, some really important things to consider in terms of logistics, and then of course the dynamics of the close. I'm not going to focus too much on the dynamics of the close. There's a lot to be said about it, but I think getting to the close is a very important stage. Transitioning into the close is a very important thing, because like once you've sort of consumed this hour of vibing where you're just playing off of each other's energy, you've really formed this sort of relationship, you know, at that point you need to start thinking about, okay, how am I going to close this? And before you close, there's several things that you need to know, and these are basic things that will help you sort of, you need to kind of seed these in, like sort of ask these types of questions, like, oh, like, you know, what area of town do you live in? That's really, really important, you know, so where are we going to go? You know, what are you doing tomorrow? You know, and who are you with? So these are the most important 3 questions. And there's a lot of things that you can do to get this types of information. What are you with is pretty easy. You know, this is all stuff that should probably be accomplished during the vibing phase, and it doesn't really take too long. You know, are you here with anybody? Like, you know, let's go, you know, meet your friends, sort of thing. You can go ask and meet your friends, and you know, that I would want to do really close to the sort of beginning of the vibing phase, where you've begun to form this unit, you want to sort of socially vet yourself with your friends, so our friends recognize you and think that you're cool, and you know, but then you need to, of course, transport her again away from the friends and form that isolation, that sort of bubble again. I mean, that's one way that it typically can happen. You know, what are you doing tomorrow? This is really, really important. And then also, where do you live? Like, if she's living really far away, like, do you need to take a cab? Like, where are we going to be going later? So this is really, really important things to know. I mean, this is sort of the logistics, and this has to be figured out at some point during the vibing phase. So don't lose track of that. Don't just like vibe, and then, you know, forget that, yeah, you're at a busy nightclub, you know, and at the end of the night, you know, in 2 hours, you're not going to be at that busy nightclub anymore. So you need to figure out, okay, is she coming with me? You know, is there some reason she can't come with me? If not, why? So then that brings us to the close. And this is I think the most sort of anxiety arousing part for the guy, because like all of a sudden the guy is like, okay, I'm going to be taking this girl home now. So in this case, it's pretty easy. I mean, I think closing is pretty easy. I mean, if everything looks good and, you know, she's really feeling it, you're really feeling it, you know, you've built up this really solid, amazing interaction with this girl, you know, then you can just more or less just take her arm and lead her out of the club. It's pretty simple. I mean, like, at that point, take her arm, lead her out of the club, and just say, let's go. You know, let's go outside for a breath of fresh air, and then just walk straight past the door. Nothing wrong with that. You can do that. Start walking with her, getting her out of that environment, getting her into some place that's a bit more quiet, you know, where you guys can talk. And and this is difficult. You know, when you finally get through the door, when you finally bring her out of the club, you know, at this point, you need to really kind of tone down. You don't want this interaction to be too intellectual. It just should be like fun, you know. And at this point, like, she will try to deflect, because like at this point she's going home with this guy that she met at the club, you know. So she's going to probably raise some resistance. So I mean, there's sort of the after party solution, which is I think really, really popular and quite frequently talked about. But there's other ways of getting around it too. You know, like let's go meet my friends over here. Of course, your friends aren't over there. You know, there's other ways of getting around it. But I mean, I think after party generally works, because that's something that people are comfortable with. They're comfortable with that concept of like, oh, let's go to an after party, and then we can, like, you know, have a couple drinks and chill together. You know, it's more of a social, but of course, like, the sub communication is still obviously sexual, because you're walking home with this girl. There doesn't actually have to be an after party. In fact, there usually never is. And the location that you go to doesn't really have to be super fantastic. It just has to be someplace where you guys can go and experience each other alone, where there's a bed where you can spend the night together. So once you finally get to this pool stage, I mean, it's again, it should be very natural. It shouldn't feel strange. I mean, another thing, I think another pitfall is like not initiating the pool, because typically, like, there's a sort of window of time, you know, between 45 minutes and an hour and 15 minutes where you can actually pull the girl. You know, if you start to go too long, she starts to get tired, and she's like, okay, your window's closed, like, we're done. And then it just sorts, you end up, you know, running damage control, and you really don't want to end up in that type of situation. But, I mean, so try to be conscious of the time, because, like, when you're vibing with a girl and it's really on, like, the time's going to go like that. It's going to go super fast. And, I mean, anyone who knows this, has experienced this and has, you know, had a lot of experience with women, knows that this vibing phase goes really, really fast. So you need to be kind of aware of the time, and you need to make sure you get your logistics under control. And then essentially the easiest thing to do is just, you know, walk her out of the nightclub. And if you can't, there's, you know, the plan B, which is just stick with her and then see what happens, you know. And that's sort of a pool, not really. It's typically not going to end that well, but maybe in, you know, 15 or 20 minutes, you can then try to actually pool again. And then, of course, the third plan is just like, okay, get her number and then plan for day 2. You know, wash, rinse, repeat is the typical saying, because then you're just going to run the whole interaction right over again, and with the hope that the logistics are better the second time. That's the only real reason to go into day 2, is that the logistics are better the second time around. So the next thing is then you finally get her into your place. Like, you want to make sure that the place, I mean, a lot of times people don't have a lot of choice about the place, but you want to make sure the place is, you know, warm, nice, clean, these types of things. I mean, you can, it happens plenty of times where girls get pulled back to some dirty room at a frat house or something like that. But I mean, you want to convey yourself in a congruent way. I mean, and the place you live in that sense is important. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it should be nice. You want to, she's a guest in your home, of course. Even though she's a girl that you took home from club, she's still a guest in your home. And I think that's a good way of showing respect beforehand. And I mean, for really, really high quality women, this is really, really important. Otherwise, if you kind of get a sort of lower quality girl, it's not going to be so important. But if you have a very high quality, very conscious, intelligent woman, that has a lot of security in herself, she's going to want to feel like she's able to be secure in your place. So you need to be able to make that happen. So typically, when you bring her home, play some music, relax the vibe, grab a glass of wine, just chill, enjoy, watch a movie, and then throw the laptop on the bed, play her some music, maybe give her a little house tour if your house is big. My apartment's pretty small here, but I mean, once you get all that set up, then just right into bed. And this is pretty easily done if the relationship is already physical, because then you're already used to kissing her. But if you haven't kissed her yet, or if it hasn't been really physical yet, then you'll meet a little bit more resistance going into this sort of final stage. And again, you want it to continue this sort of sexual context, and you want it to be fun, have fun. So bringing her home should be the most fun part, and ideally, you want to keep this girl. You want to, you have spent all this good time with her, and you've kind of made sure, you've kind of vetted her too, during that vibing phase, when she hooks you, so once you finally get to that final location, you have this amazing release of that masculine energy and that feminine energy kind of coming together in a really positive sexual experience. About the sexual experience itself, I think that this is really, really important, and because in order to have a good experience with her and feel good about it yourself and have her feel good about it too, you have to be able to have good sex. And this is really important. The sex doesn't have to be, it can be very chill. Calibrate during sex the same as you would calibrate, when you're meeting someone new, at the club. You have to continue to do that same calibration, It's such a dynamic, interpersonal, beautiful interaction that you're having with her, that it's really important that sexual interaction for her goes really well, and that she feels really, really positive and happy at the end of it. Because at the end, the idea is we want to not only create a beautiful experience for ourselves, we also want to create a beautiful experience for her. So in a lot of ways, I think that this is really important, because if it is that good, it'll be an experience that she'll never forget. And I think that that's a really amazing thing, that you can kind of go through all this, and then when you're actually having sex with her, release yourself, try not to have performance anxiety or any of these types of things. I know that can be really difficult. A lot of guys have problems with that, but try to enjoy the fact that you can be together in this really close physical way. And again, the sort of thing that happens is you complete the curve. The red thread, finally finds its end. You find your way out of the maze, because at the beginning, if you look at the whole interaction, from open to sex, you have, of course, you open, and then you rise through those two hook points, and then you vibe, and then tension increases, and then you have sex, which is the orgasm. That's the big climax of the whole interaction. So it's reflected. Everything is a microcosm, and everything is recursive throughout the entire interaction, which is, in my opinion, the most beautiful aspect of it, is that the entire process is self-similar, like a fractal or something like this. It's really, really amazing. So that basically closes the 4 stages of the game, quote unquote, as people like to call it. And I think that it's important to go over a few final notes. in order to do this, you have to be really experienced. You may, like, in yourself, I mean, life experience. Pickup is not something, it is something that you can learn, but in order to learn it, it requires a huge change to yourself. You need to go out and you need to kind of collect all the life experience you need to be able to maintain this interaction, to be able to maintain this presence of maleness, to be able to maintain this security, this confidence, this solid, straight thinking male energy, just straight, constant, steady energy. That requires a lot of life experience because, I think women tend to be, and not all women, but a lot of women tend to be a bit chaotic. A lot of people in general are just pretty chaotic, but you want to be able to establish this very, very constant, steady energy. And in order to be able to do that and get through the entire sort of sequence that's taught at RSD, you need to be able to have the life experience. And I think that, one of the ways that you can do this is throw yourself into unfamiliar situations. And I give a funny example which comes to mind is like when I was traveling in Thailand, and I went to this island in the south of Thailand called Phuket. And there, like in Asia, there's a lot of prostitution. And these prostitutes basically like really love foreigners. And basically what you end up seeing is there's so many women vying for so few men. And it really flips your head around on how you think about women. Just to be around women, and it's the kind of place like where, I call it the Isle of Woman. Like there's the Isle of Man, like, somewhere in the North Sea. Well, it's between England and Ireland, I guess. And then you have, the Isle of Woman, which is, Phuket. And like when you go there, like, and you experience this just abundance of women, it really changes your frame. It changes the way that you think about it, because they're like, the women are coming onto you, And of course, it's kind of the same situation. You don't really have to do anything. So, of course, it's unnatural, but it's an unfamiliar experience, and you gain that sort of reference point in your mind about what that feels like. And I think that that's really important. So, gaining life experience is really important. And put yourself in a position where you have the ability to gain life experiences. Go travel. Go see the world. You can do it. You can travel the world. You can see a lot of beautiful places, and a lot of this gives you a lot of context that you can relate to people, because maybe they went there too, or maybe they really want to go there. You can tell them about that time you were hanging out in Sicily, or that time that you were hanging out in South Africa or Japan or Thailand or Singapore or India or Australia, all beautiful countries, by the way. I think that it can be a really positive experience. It makes you so much more interesting, and it's inspiring because those experiences inspire you, and that inspiration becomes a sort of seed which gives you the ability to inspire other people and ultimately inspire women and achieve the goal of being able to master this technology. So with that, I guess I will conclude. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great time. Good luck.